Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you like this episode, please remember to hit the like button and leave a comment or two, then subscribe and click on the bell to receive notifications of whenever we release new videos. Also, please remember to share them to your social media. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to a very familiar and alarming venue. Yes, we are going back to Alaska, but this time we'll be visiting the Elmendorf-Richardson Joint Air Force Base on the north side of Anchorage. The base is bordered on the west and north by the Kenai Arm, and on the south by the city of Anchorage. In the east, though, a stretch of sparsely populated forest stretches from the Chugach Mountains, interrupted only by highways and other roads. The elevation here is below 200 feet above sea level, and thick pockets of spruce, fir, and birch trees tower over blankets of alder and willow bush. There are swamps and creeks here, which run with salmon and other fish each summer, making this area a prime spot for many animals. Moose are a common sight near the base, as well as brown bears and black bears. On the base, families of soldiers live in nearby housing complexes, and one of them is called the Moose Crossing Housing Complex. Moose Crossing is a modern housing development with curving streets lined with moderately sized homes. Scattered throughout the subdivision are a handful of playgrounds, centrally located for neighborhood kids to access. The slides and swings are padded with sand, so kids don't hurt themselves. Though many of the backyards in the neighborhood are fenced, the playgrounds are placed in the middle of open community yards. Kids and their parents can walk straight across the grass or run and play on it. It is perfect for picnics or games of tag. But what the open grassy layout of the community yard is not good for is keeping the bears of the area away from children. On June 4th, 2010, 4 young girls were having a ball as their ponytails bounced with each jubilant step they took. For the sake of this episode, we'll call them Julie, age 5, Jenny, age 6, Shelly, age 8, and Sandy, age 9. The girls were friends and played together frequently on the playground just off Campos Avenue on the north side of the complex. This playground was surrounded by trees and bushes, which gave it a relaxing feeling. This summer day was typical, with temperatures ranging into the mid-50s by the afternoon, with a 6-mile-per-hour breeze and clear skies. It was just another day in paradise, but sometimes it rains, even in paradise. As the girls played and frolicked, a few of the parents looked on and chatted, unaware of a very interested and dangerous visitor approaching them. From the obscurity of the nearby bushes, the girls' giggles had reached the ears of the black bear. It emerged from the brush about 30 feet from the girls and was focused on their movements and laughter. Now, black bears are not a rare sight in Anchorage or anywhere in Alaska. While I was visiting about 13 years ago, one ran right past my friend and I as we shot our bows in his yard. The presence of a black bear likely did get the parents' attention, but didn't alarm them to action. What did get their attention was that the bear didn't disappear into the brush upon seeing the people at the playground. It crouched down just a bit and slowly started walking directly toward the playing children. Upon seeing the approaching bear, Sandy began to yell to alert everyone of its presence. Once everyone started looking at the bear, they began to yell and scream at it too, but it continued its methodical stalk toward the children. Herman Greasy is the wildlife biologist for the 3rd Wing on base. Part of his job was to educate the base residents on how to handle interactions with wildlife and stay safe doing so. He spent time in the schools and made sure to explain to the kids that playing dead was what to do if they surprised a bear. But how do you teach a child what to do when they encounter a bear demonstrating predatory behavior? His instructions were essentially the same as the ones adults received, and included making noise and trying to make yourself appear as large as possible. Remembering these lessons, Sandy puffed herself up and lifted her arms above her head, but the bear continued to slowly step toward the little girls. It seemed mesmerized by their vulnerability. Realizing that her efforts were not frightening the bear, Sandy dashed off toward her home to get her parents, hoping that they would be able to scare it off. Jenny, Julie, and Shelly were much too close to the bear to run away, and somehow the little girls knew that. Their lessons on bear-aware behavior told them that running may cause the bear to chase them, just like kids do when another kid runs from them. The little girls told each other to play dead, just like they were told in their classrooms. One by one, the little girls flopped over and buried their faces toward the ground. By this point, the bear was within just a few feet of the girls. When they flopped over, the bear seemed curious and maybe even confused. These girls hadn't run away like some sort of prey animal, and they weren't fighting like something the bear would have to protect itself against. Befuddled by the little girl's mysterious and instant deaths, the bear began to sniff them as they laid on the ground. It approached Julie and investigated her as she froze, hoping it would leave her alone. The bear stretched out one of its paws and placed it on her back. Julie could feel the pressure of the bear's paw on her back and focused on remaining calm and quiet. She held her hands alongside her head and neck to make sure the bear didn't bite her anywhere that would cause a severe injury. Julie could only wait, as she could hear the bear sniffing her and breathing. As the bear stood on and over Julie, Shelly and Jenny peered through their fingers, hoping it would not hurt their friend. As they watched, they could see the bear drop its head toward Julie's leg and open its mouth. It slowly closed its jaws on Julie's leg, and she let out a squeal at first. Then her fear grew into terror, and she screamed as the bear's teeth punctured her skin. The unexpected reaction from Julie sent the bear scurrying off a few yards, where it paused and stared at her. It didn't expect the girl to scream, and was alarmed by the sudden noise. Just then Sandy's mom came running onto the playground. She yelled at the bear, and it showed no reaction to her presence or her shouts. The girls were instructed to walk to a neighbor's house, and with trepidation slowly obeyed Sandy's mom. As soon as the girls had entered the neighbor's house, Sandy's mom began walking slowly away from the playground toward Campos Avenue. The bear, having found a new fascination, followed her onto the street. Sandy's mom pulled out her cell phone and snapped a few pictures of the bear, just in case there was any way authorities could recognize it from its markings or other distinguishing characteristics. Once Sandy's mom led the kids away and got to safety herself, the bear meandered around the playground for a few minutes. After the people were gone, it seemed to be unsure of what to do next. Neighbors watched it from the relative safety of their houses until it disappeared back into the forest around the housing development. Julie was taken to the base hospital and her wounds were cleaned and sutured. She was left with scratches from the bear's claws where it stood on her back and 4 puncture wounds in her leg from its teeth. The tissue around the bite wound was bruised and sore for a few days, but Julie made a full recovery soon after the attack. The mental anguish from the little girl's experience may scar her for life, but we are hoping it doesn't. As a result of this attack, the base refined its approach to bears. Its educational program that had taught children bear awareness was successful. The predatory behavior of this bear may have been amplified if the little girls had run away. It may have caused an attack by the bear, and the results of that may have been catastrophic. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. What do you think may have happened had the girls run away upon seeing the bear? Do you think the base should have a bear response team? Why didn't the parents have a can of bear spray for such occasions? What would you do if your child was on a playground and a black bear began to sneak up on her? I will gladly read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comment section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us back to Hidden Creek Trail near Skilac Lake on the Kenai Peninsula in South Alaska. In previous episodes on this channel, I've discussed how the Sitka spruce stands intermingle with alder patches to cover the sloping topography and low elevation of this area. The creeks and streams here run briskly with salmon during parts of the summer. This activity is key to bear survival and brings people into proximity with bears. Although there are plentiful moose on the peninsula for the bears to eat, the salmon provide a nearly irreplaceable source of fat and nutrients to the bears. A resource that the bears will defend from each other violently, and sometimes to the death. Early summer is a great time for bears in Alaska. Only a few weeks before this time of year, bears emerge from their winter dens, hungry and searching for food. Initially, they feed on plant matter, like sedge grasses and plant buds. From time to time, they may catch a moose calf, or even find an injured moose to feed upon, but the most plentiful food source for them is when the salmon begin to run in the creeks and streams. Around May each year, the first ocean-bound fish that start making their way upstream are known as candlefish, or scientifically, eulicons. These pencil-long fish are up to 20% fat and are among the first fish to run up freshwater streams. These little fish are not only an important source of fat for sea lions, seals, whales, sharks, salmon, and seabirds, they also feed bears, wolves, and eagles on their migration inland. Once they lay their eggs in the silty waters of streams and creeks, their bodies perish and provide food for scavengers and an aromatic signal to bears that fish are migrating upstream. This scent draws bears from their winter dens in higher elevations toward the streams and creeks in preparation for the salmon runs that take place over the summer. If bears fail to capitalize on the various fish runs along the streams, then they may be in for a bleak and desperate winter. At 11:45 a.m. on Thursday, November 16, 2023, a 72-year-old fisherman, whom we will call Dan, was fishing with one of his buddies, whom we will call Chad, along Hidden Creek near Skylac Lake. As any sportsman would agree, a day at the lake is better than any day in the office, and trout fishing at Skylac Lake was proof of that axiom. As Dan and his partner pushed their way through the thick alders along the banks of the creek, they worked their way toward the lake. They had hoped to land a big lake trout, rainbow, or Dolly Varden, but then again, it wouldn't be called fishing if the results were guaranteed. Besides, it wasn't how big the fish was, but how big the story was. Well, today's fishing story was about to take a fascinating twist. Now, Dan was no dummy when he ventured into the forest to fish. He brought along with him his bear spray, even though bears should be hibernating by this time of year. A familiarity with the risks of venturing into the forests of Alaska made him prepare, at least as much as he thought he should. As the men went from fishing hole to fishing hole, they had varying luck and could see the last remnants of the prior season's salmon run. Salmon carcasses littered the banks in pockets, rotting and signaling the end of the season. The fish were more isolated since the snowmelt had long subsided, and this variation provided pockets of success or frustration, depending on the fish. As Dan pushed his way from one of the fishing holes to another, he approached a desperate and dire standoff with a protective mama brown bear, and was completely oblivious to what lay ahead of him. With the leaves now fallen and the air turned more crisp by the brief fall, Dan didn't expect to be as alert for the location of bears. During prior months, bears would crowd the banks of Hidden Creek and most other bodies of water, but now most of them were denned up, or heading there. Chad and Dan were parting the brush and weaving their fishing poles through the tangled brush when a flash of brown blurred through the bushes toward their left and ahead of them. They could recognize this bouncing ball of fuzz as a brown bear cub, but that begged the question, where was its mother? Before the fishermen could do anything about it, the sow they were hoping to locate made her location well known. With a roar that nearly split their eardrums, the sow emerged from a location just behind where the cub had dashed from to their right. The sow focused her eyes on the fisherman, and primarily on Dan, given he was closer to her cub. In a flash, the sow closed the distance between her and Dan. She quickly swatted the man and bit him several times in a rapid and severe attack. She knocked Dan down and swatted him a few more times before disappearing into the brush to find her cubs. Chad somehow had avoided being attacked by the angry sow and stood afterward, confused and overwhelmed at the speed and violence of the sow's attack on Dan. Seeing his friend laying on the ground, bleeding and stunned, triggered something in Chad. He knew he would have to find help for Dan. Given the men had few options but to walk out, he helped Dan to his feet, and they assessed the damage inflicted by the bear. There isn't a clear source that indicates just how the men managed to get help, but somehow a medevac helicopter made its way to their location. The first responders loaded Dan into the helicopter and quickly flew him out to a hospital for medical attention. Once he was examined, Dan's injuries were labeled as non-life-threatening, which is no indication of their severity. To be categorized as life-threatening, an injury must cause loss of consciousness, impaired cognition, substantial blood loss, head trauma, or breathing problems. That would limit Dan's injuries to non-arterial bleeding, located anywhere but his head or neck. I would say he got out lucky, given he had walked between a brown bear sow and her cub. In response to Dan's attack, authorities closed the Hidden Creek Trail to all visitors. They'd conducted a quick investigation into the attack and had vacated the area no later than 6 p.m. the following Thursday. This was done to allow the sow and her cubs time to calm down from the stressful altercation they'd had with Dan and his partner, and to prevent further confrontations with her. Hidden Creek has been the location of another interesting episode on our channel, and this one indicates a dire trend in brown bear tolerance of human presence in the area. Our prior episode is linked to in the video article below this video, so you can review it if you are interested in learning about it. Authorities cite the backcountry traffic substantially increased following the COVID-19 lockdowns. With an increase in human traffic, starving or hungry bears may be falling back on aggressive and defensive behavior to protect food sources. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Granted that Dan and Chad had brought bear spray, would a firearm have changed the outcome of this attack? Did this sow's cubs see anything that may increase the likelihood of them attacking humans over their lives? What could Dan and Chad have done to avoid such a violent surprise confrontation? What would you do if you found yourself face to face with an angry brown bear sow, armed only with a fishing pole for your defense? I'll be glad to read and reply to your thoughts, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Welcome back to Scary Bear Attacks. Today's episode takes us to the Upper Kenai Trail, accessed from the Skilak Lake Loop Road on the Kenai Peninsula in South Alaska. In some of our previous episodes, we've discussed attacks near this location, and this one took place only a few hundred yards from Hidden Creek. Near Hidden Creek, the terrain opens up to a broad yet small valley. On the west end of that valley, Hidden Creek separates from the Kenai River, which turns east. As it turns, the Kenai River enters a steep canyon, but doesn't lack in alderbrush and patches of Sitka spruce. This canyon forms a boundary of physically demanding terrain, which tends to keep human traffic to a minimum. The steep slopes retreat from Skilak Lake, and the fish offered to sportsmen there, leaving only adventuresome folks to appreciate the isolation and solitude of the Upper Kenai River Trail. The allure of wilderness has always beckoned to primitive pilgrims who appreciate the purity and privacy of isolated areas. On June 29th, around 7:38 p.m., Jason Umbriaco and his 14-week-old border collie Buckley were hiking the Upper Kenai Trail and enjoying time in the woods. Jason was visiting the area from Montana and had been learning to live with a brain injury he'd suffered in 2008. He'd leaned on dogs to help him in his rehabilitation. Buckley was his most recent support animal, helping him in his recovery. As the man and his trusty companion were trudging through the bushes, making their way along the trail, they had no idea what surprise lay in wait for them. A brown bear sow and her 2 cubs were trying to find salmon along the banks of the river and headed in a direct route toward the man and his dog. As Jason and Buckley rounded a corner, they heard a rustling in the bushes just above the trail. To Jason's horror, a massive brown bear sow emerged from the brush, followed by her 2 cubs. Jason froze at the sight of the bears and slowly reached for his bear spray. Buckley instantly rose to his owner's defense and furiously closed in on the bears. He dashed toward the sow and her cubs while barking and growling, as if he was going to scare them. The sow reacted with confusion and rage as the dog seemed to threaten her and her cubs. She swatted at the dog and spun in defense of her young ones. Jason wasn't sure what to do as Buckley continually attacked the bears, while ignoring his owner's instructions to come back. After hearing Jason's yelling, the sow lifted her head from snapping at Buckley and set her dreaded gaze on the man. The fury in her eyes communicated her rage as she covered the 50 feet separating them in a flash, before Jason could flip the safety cap off of his bear spray. Jason lifted his hands toward his head as the sow bore down on him. By the time the sow clamped her jaws onto Jason's arm near his elbow, the reality of the situation had set in. He realized this was not some horrific nightmare, but something he had to deal with quickly. The sow shook her head back and forth, jostling Jason violently. As soon as she released her grip on his arm, Jason did the only thing that made sense to him at the time. He leapt from the bank of the river, hoping the sow would relent in her attack on him. As the cold water shocked him into realizing what he had just done, he struggled toward the surface. The sow didn't miss a beat and charged into the water after Jason. By now he had stood to his feet as the rushing water pushed around his waist. The sow sank her giant yellow canines into his shoulder and bit down while twisting her head violently. Quickly ripping deep gashes with her teeth, the sow decided to check on her cubs and made her way out of the river, leaving Jason battered but alive. Jason watched as the sow and her cubs beat a hasty retreat as he called for Buckley. After a brief search, the stress of the attack led Jason to head back to his vehicle to seek medical attention for the wounds the sow had inflicted on his body. Buckley was nowhere to be found and couldn't be heard barking in reply to his calls. Jason hiked quickly, trying to put as much distance between him and the brown bears as he could. Once Jason arrived at his vehicle, he accessed his cell phone and gratefully received service. He called 911 and requested help to his location. While under care at the hospital in Soldotna, the details of Jason's attack circulated quickly among the staff and to the helpful ears of a nurse by the name of Bonnie Nichols. Bonnie had heard from the hospital's chaplain that Buckley was still missing after Jason's condition had stabilized. Bonnie informed Jason that if he would send her a picture of Buckley, she would post it on her social media platforms to try to help locate him. It turned out that a woman named Wendy Wilson was driving to Anchorage the day Jason and Buckley had the run-in with the sow. She had stopped along the roadside after seeing a stray dog trotting down the shoulder of the road. After rounding up the dog, who turned out to be Buckley, Wendy took him home with her and made sure he had food and a warm place to stay for the night. He was missing his collar with his dog tags, which were pulled off at some point, and the scrap with the bears. Jason identified the pictures Wendy had sent to Bonnie and replied to her social media post. After spending one night at the hospital, Jason was discharged and was ultimately reunited with Buckley. Authorities issued some valuable information to the public following Jason and Buckley's attack. They requested that forest visitors keep an eye out for animal carcasses or the scent of a dead animal. The presence of eagles, magpies, crows, ravens, and gray jays may indicate that there is an animal carcass nearby that may draw hungry bears to the area. Ravens have been observed in a coordinated effort to rouse sleeping bears to get them to catch fish, from which the ravens will receive the scraps. The relationship between predators and the animals supported by their success is an interesting example of how vital the salmon runs are to many species. After reviewing the facts surrounding this episode, I'm left with a few questions for you. Do you think this attack may have played out differently if Jason had had Buckley on a leash? Given this attack happened too quickly for Jason to dispense his bear spray, would a firearm have made any difference? The next time you see a murder of crows, will you be on the lookout for a sleuth of bears? I will gladly read and reply to your comments, so please post them in the comments section below, and let's talk about it. Thank you for watching Scary Bear Attacks. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider clicking on the like button and clicking on the bell icon. We'll help you know when we post our new episodes. Posting our video links to your social media profiles furthers awareness, and it's fun. We slashed our prices in our merch store, linked below, so check out the bargains there while you shop. As a member of our human community, remember to adventure bravely and be careful out there, especially in bear country.